Hello, everyone. So let's talk a little bit about Israel's bombing of Syria and really what this means in my perspective. Well, first off, Israel's bombing of Syria pissed off the Americans, and this is the reason why the United States told Israel to back off. Stop bombing Syria. Back off. Now, why did the United States tell Israel to back off? Well, it's very obvious why. Because the current government in Syria is ran by NATO. Mr. Ahmed al-Shara is a NATO asset. And the dominating NATO power in Syria is Turkey. Turkey is controlling Damascus. Turkey controls Ahmed al-Shara. And Israel bombing Syria is a threat to Turkey's power in Syria. So the Turks told the Americans to tell the Israelis to back off. The foreign minister of Turkey, Mr. Hakan Fidan, spoke with the U.S. envoy in Syria, Mr. Thomas Barak, to tell the Israelis to piss off out of Syria. And so the Americans told the Israelis to piss off. So the Americans do not want the Israelis to just start bombing Syria. They don't like that the Israelis did this because it really deepens the tensions between Israel and Turkey. And Israel is really stuck in a particular position. It wants to be the dominating country in the Middle East. It wants to be the biggest dog in this neighborhood that we call the Middle East. But there is the reality of Turkey, and Turkey is the second most armed country in NATO. It is a very powerful country. It is by far the most powerful country in the Islamic world. And Turkey is saying, listen, we're going to be the biggest dog in the Middle East, not you, Israel. Piss off out of here. And so the Israelis start bombing Syria, and that is a threat to Turkey's sphere of power in the region. Syria is sort of like what Ukraine is to Russia. So what Syria is to Turkey, Ukraine is to Russia. Russia sees Ukraine as a part of its sphere of interest, as a part of its sphere of power and influence, and Russia doesn't like the fact that NATO wants to control Ukraine. And so for many years, the Russians were telling the Americans, were telling the Germans, listen, stay out of Eastern Europe. We don't want you in Eastern Europe. And NATO never really gave a damn about what Russia wanted because NATO never really took Russia seriously initially, right? So after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Americans saw the Russians as weak, and at that particular point, they were. And so the Americans said, now's the time to hit the metal when it's hot. Now is the time to establish a global American empire. And this is what Charles Krauthammer said, actually. He said that now that the Soviet Union is no more, now that the Soviet Union has fallen, it's time for the Americans to hit the metal when it's hot and establish a global hegemon. And that's exactly what the Americans began to do. So the Americans really lied to the Russians, told them that they had no interest in expanding NATO eastward outside of Germany. The Russians bought into it. And NATO just kept expanding. And for years, the Russians were telling the Americans, listen, we don't like this. Please stop. America never stopped. And so eventually, Russia had to show its teeth, and Russia invaded Ukraine. And then all the NATOists started acting like, oh my God, they just invaded a country overnight out of nowhere. What is going on? This is terrible. As if Putin just had some dumplings and black tea and some of those little Russian jelly cookies that they love so much, and just decided to invade a country, just willy-nilly, nonchalantly like that. And that's just bullshit. And so Turkey is warning the Israelis. Turkey is warning Israel. Stop, Israel. Stop, Israel. Syria is a part of our sphere of influence. And they're not stopping. They just don't give a damn. Turkey took over Damascus soon after Assad fled to Russia. And Turkey said, okay, all of these not old, but all of these abandoned Syrian Air Force bases are now ours. These are our Air Force bases. And Israel said, no, they're not. And Turkey said, yes, they are. And then what happened? Israel bombed one of the airstrips for one of the air bases that Turkey claims to be its own, that Turkey claims for itself. I think it's called the U4 or the U2 Air Force Base, or U4, I don't remember. But it was one of the abandoned Air Force bases that the Assad regime left behind. And Turkey took it over. And then Israel bombed the airstrip outside of the Air Force base. And that was a way to tell Turkey, we're in charge here. We're the ones who are in charge. And so if Turkey is going to want to show the Muslim world that it has teeth against Israel, against the Zionist, eventually Turkey is going to show its teeth. Turkey is warning Israel, stop, stop, stop. Even the foreign minister, Mr. Hakan Fidan, like I said, spoke to the American envoy to Syria, Thomas Barak, and told Mr. Barak, tell the Israelis to stop. And so the Israelis are not going to stop. They're going to continue on because the Israelis have a dream of creating greater Israel. They want to establish a Jewish empire. And Mr. Bezalel Smotrich said this in an interview. He said, I want to control Jordan. I want to control all these neighboring Middle Eastern countries. And this is the dream of Israel. They want to expand settlements into Syria. And they want to be an empire in the Middle East. And this is the reason why, for many, many years, the Israelis, through their neoconservative acolytes, their Zionist acolytes in the United States, told the Americans to do all sorts of various wars in the Middle East to overthrow Middle Eastern governments, such as we all know, the Saddam Hussein government, the Assad government, the Gaddafi government. And then they also pushed the Americans to overthrow the Ayatollah Khomeini's regime in Iran. Why are the Israelis doing this? You think the Israelis give a shit about human rights and democracy and all that? They don't give a shit about any of that stuff. They've been bombing the shit out of Gaza. Now we have videos showing Palestinians dead outside of one of these aid distribution centers. I mean, it's horrific. And hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians have been killed just because they're outside looking for food. And we're supposed to sit here and pretend like Israel gives a shit about democracy? I mean, if you actually believe that, then you're a tool, bottom line. Israel doesn't give a shit about the Druze. It doesn't. I don't buy this for 1 second. I know that the Druze make up like 2% of Israel's population, and the Druze are super pro-Israel in Israel and all this stuff, but I just don't buy into this. For one thing, governments don't really do things out of altruism or out of moral desire. Sometimes they do, but they're extremely rare. So I don't want to make it out as if they never do things out of moral desire. But generally speaking, the rule is governments don't do things out of moral willpower. They do things out of geopolitical interest. And that's pretty much it. And so Israel is using whatever problems the Druze have in Syria as a pretext to enter Syria militarily. The Americans know this. Israel is saying that the Syrian government is doing atrocities on the Druze people. Perhaps that's true. I don't want to just flat out deny it. But at the same time, it is relevant to factor in that American intelligence, U.S. intelligence, has said that there really is no evidence, or that they see no evidence for the Syrian government doing atrocities on the Druze. Now, perhaps the Americans are saying this because the Syrian government is an American/NATO proxy, but who knows? What I do know is that Israel is simply using the Druze as a pretext to militarily bomb and invade Syria. That's what I do know. How do I know this? Because if Israel really gave a damn about the Druze people, they would have entered Syria years ago. Back in 2015, al-Nusra rebels were butchering Druze in Syria back in 2015. Back in 2018, there were the, I believe they're known as the al-Suwaida killings. This happened back in 2018. And in this story, in this particular story, ISIS killers went door to door in Druze areas, in Druze neighborhoods in Al Suwaida, and they just butchered people. They went house to house and just butchered people. It was absolutely horrific. They killed hundreds of Druze people. And Israel didn't do shit about it. Didn't do a damn thing. So why didn't Israel do something? I mean, and it's not like the Syrian government was doing that. That was done by ISIS. That was done by a bunch of terrorist rebels in Syria. Israel could have said, hey, let's get a coalition. Let's enter Syria. Let's bomb ISIS areas. They could have done that. They could have said, hey, let's send our finest assassins into... I know Israel loves doing assassinations. They could have said, hey, let's go into Syria. Let's assassinate these bastards. They could have done that, right? And the whole world would have supported them. But they didn't, because they don't give a shit about the Druze. They're only doing this for one reason, and one reason alone. It's just to grab territory. This is a power grab. They waited for Assad to be overthrown, and now they're just like a bunch of vultures on a dead body. And the whole world sees it. No one really believes Israeli propaganda anymore, and if they do, they're just boomers, or they're just crazy evangelical Zionists. No one really believes Israel anymore. Israel has lost its edge as far as propaganda goes. Israel has lost its edge as far as actually influencing the world goes. And people just don't give a damn. Everyone's talking about the freaking Epstein situation. And who was Jeffrey Epstein? He was a Jewish pimp. That's what he was. He was a Jewish pimp. His girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, I think she had some connections to the Mossad or something like that. I never really seriously looked into it, but this is what I've heard. And so what are people saying, right? This is my whole point. My whole point is not that... My whole point is not to get into the Jeffrey Epstein details. My whole point is to get into what perception people have in regards to Israel in light of the Jeffrey Epstein situation, in light of the Gaza situation. What people are thinking and what people are saying is, hey, our government is protecting Epstein. Our government is covering up for what Epstein did. And so who do our politicians really serve? This is the whole question, right? This is why people are obsessing over this. The reason why people are obsessing over this is because the whole story makes people wonder, who really runs our politicians? Who controls our politicians? Is it the American people, or is it the Israeli government? And so this is getting people to more and more hate on Israel. It's increasing. It is exasperating the antagonism towards Israel. And it's only deepening the chasm that exists between the Zionist pro-Israel world and the people who really don't like Israel, and really the people who could be supporting Israel, but they're just so disillusioned with Israel that they have decided not to support Israel anymore. It's not just the Jeffrey Epstein situation, although the Epstein situation is definitely a huge fulcrum in this whole quagmire. It's also the whole Gaza situation, seeing civilians being butchered and all this stuff. And it's like the whole Israel has lost the plot. No one gives a shit about Israel. The American people, for the most part, don't give a damn about Israel. I was watching a debate between Josh Hammer and Dave Smith. And you read the comments underneath the debate, and it's almost every comment is supporting Dave Smith and not Josh Hammer. And Josh Hammer is a hardcore Hosperus Zionist. And then I was watching a debate between Mehdi Hassan and Mr. Alan Dershowitz. And Alan Dershowitz will always be seen as the guy who was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. He will always be seen as the lawyer for Benjamin Netanyahu. No one really likes him. And he's an asshole anyway. He disrupts people all the time in debates. But Mehdi Hassan is a very good debater. And Mehdi Hassan was bringing up war crimes and things of that sort. And Alan Dershowitz tried to gaslight people. He kept saying, well, soldiers who commit war crimes are going to be tried, or they've already been tried by the Israeli government. And Mehdi Hassan said, okay, give me an example of a trial. Tell me about these trials. They're not happening. And Mr. Pierce Morgan brought up an interesting point with Alan Dershowitz. He said, aren't you worried that Israel's actions are going to further isolate it from the rest of the world? And Alan Dershowitz said, yeah, I see it. Because Piers Morgan said, there's a lot of hatred against Israel, and that hatred is increasing. And Dershowitz said, yeah, I agree, it is. I see it, I see it. So the pro-Israel people see it, right? The people who are on the highest echelons of the pro-Israel movement, they see how huge the rage against Israel is. They see it. They see the writing on the wall. And so Israel just continues to act recklessly. They're going to continue to attack Syria. They're going to continue to foment violence in Syria, find reasons to bomb Syria. And it's only going to piss off the Turks. The Turks are saying, back off, back off, back off, back off. Eventually, Turkey's going to act. And the world's going to look at Israel and say, oh, you mean the country that gave us Jeffrey Epstein? You mean the country of Epstein? You mean the country of war criminals? You mean the country of Zionist racists who hate Goyim? That place, they're not going to care. They're not going to give a shit. Israel has totally lost the plot. And no one gives a damn. That's the thing. That's just the bottom freaking line. No one gives a damn. And that's all I got to say. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.